everybody. I'm back. I've been pretty busy recently. I guess it's about time I announced the official launch or opening of this new project I've been working on. It's just an AI matchmaking site, or AI dating, whatever you want to call it. So I thought I'd get into some of the reasoning behind why I made it the way I did and what it's for, I guess. I've been thinking about this project for a while, actually, years, in fact, just because online dating is frustrating. Trying to meet people online is frustrating, making new friends, that sort of thing. And I'd always been wondering, how can this be better? And one of my favorite sites, Doki Cupid, for instance, as I watched their development over the years, just in my opinion, as a data-minded person, I liked having information. I liked having, some level of influence over who and what I was paired with, rather than just a flat number. And over time, it just became, too many people complained about how the algorithm saw them relative to other people. And the categories became less and less useful, and being able to search by categories became problematic, because you could look for, people that were more outgoing, people that were more conscious or sexually active, things like that. So it became too gameable and too vulnerable to malevolent actors. And with that in mind, as I was working on this article I released, I think November last year, 10 Reasons You Suck at Love, it dawned on me that there was a simple enough formula for expressing the likelihood of relationships surviving. It was FHN times morality, something like that. Vaguely, it's in the article. But the idea boiled down to, there's flirtiness, horniness, neediness as the base, tenets of whether a person was compatible with somebody else. And then there is morality, which is how well do they aspire to meet the local, common morals, so the common values of whatever community they live in, right? And that differs by culture, that differs by language, but it's a simple enough metric, right? And then, so flirtiness was just more about how people's humor worked with each other, whether they'd be able to laugh at the same things, whether they'd be able to enjoy the same sorts of interactions with each other. Horniness is just simple, how horny, but in horny in what ways? Because it's if somebody's a dom and the other person's a sub, sure, they're compatible in that regard. But then is the dom, is he a masochist? Does he actually like to torture? Or is he a gentle dom that wants to take care, but is still firm? So there are nuances in those sorts of compatibilities. So each of these FHN values were matrices in and of themselves, closer to two-dimensional matrices rather than, a flat value. And then, once it came to morality and just overall compatibility, which is, how similar are your outlooks, how similar are your education levels, how similar are your financial interests and future interests, things like that. So once you combine compatibility with morality and then the FHN value, it became a pretty reliable indicator of what sort of relationship somebody would have. And I started using this as a way to look at relationships that I'd met and encountered in real life, and I was very happy with how it met up with standards of relationships that lasted and the sorts of relationships that they have, and the dynamics, whether or not they're poly or not, whether or not they're cheating or not, whether or not they last for a while, whether or not they just fool around. And with that knowledge, it sort of dawned on me that no dating online system helps in terms of managing, relationships at that level of, just thought, because there's too much incentive to make money in the long term by keeping people going back to the dating site for more dates. Like, that was the issue I found, right? If the dating site was geared to starting new relationships, once you start a new relationship on the site, they lose a customer. So that's part of why I think there's been an increase in the idea of polyamory and, ethical non-monogamy. It keeps the dating industry going. And it's definitely, there are benefits to it for sure, but there are also downsides, so you can't get as close to somebody. You can, but then there's always the risk of their choosing someone else. You may not be somebody's priority the way they are to you. Those sorts of dynamics start to alight, so to speak. So, I became interested in ways to not discourage non-monogamy, but not encourage either. Like, not to encourage cheating, not to make it easy to cheat, not to dangle the carrot, so to speak, in front of your eye. So one of the big things I decided with the system was to not have, profile pictures, because I also realized that a lot of these dating sites also feed into the porn mentality that a lot of people have, particularly men, like really heavily men, right? Because you see a picture of a pretty girl, she's, dressed a certain way, maybe she's in a bikini or whatnot, and like the reptile part of the brain just starts going off, and like the way you speak isn't the way you'd speak to somebody if you wanted them to think highly of you, so to speak. But it's because you're in a low space at that time, and not even low as in like negative or bad, just like low as in you're thinking with your genitals. So I just wanted to be able to discourage that in a system. So no profile pictures, no pictures of any sort. And I also decided not to have racial matching, just because, I sort of built this around my own, love history that's been going well, but, there's still, a lot to learn. So as I'm learning, I've particularly never been able to match with people of my own culture. Not that I don't like my culture, it's just I'm very different from other people from my culture just because I had a strange upbringing, I lived a strange life. So I'm sure I would match more with people within my culture if I was more like them. If I chose to be more like them, so to speak, if I chose to espouse the same sorts of values as them. But I'm already not a religious person, so that becomes such a massive barrier to a lot of people's, intrinsic relationships or the comfort of what they do or their activities. So that in mind, I just decided to leave race out of it. And I also find it fun to see how people match with each other when race is excluded, entirely. Because it's just one of those ways I like to watch mine squirm. So with all that in mind, I started building the system, focusing first on the FHN values just because they were easier for me, fluidiness, horniness, neediness. They're simple enough values to figure out how to tack, right? And even then, there's also the deeper questions of compatibility and morality that can't really be addressed directly through multiple choice questions, which is what I see in a lot of these dating sites, right? There are multiple choices, and there's an element to that here, for sure, but there's also a written component that I do not take lightly. It's not meant to be easy. This is, looking for somebody is a challenge, regardless, but the idea of the site is to be efficient and effective at finding people that are up to the challenge of life in the same ways you are. So that's why the written portion is long and difficult, so to speak. But worth it, because once you find somebody that matches with you in those dimensions in a real way, you don't want to lose that person. So it's just been my approach to this whole game of romance and love and life. But like beyond this, like the whole aspects of how we do dating now in this like post-COVID era. So, you know, I've been working on apps. One of the big things is chatting and video chatting in particular. So that's been a major focus. For now, it'll likely just be Zoom calls. We're still waiting on just building our databases to have enough people to match freely, because let's say we're looking for everyone's 1 in 1,000 match, so to speak, or maybe 2 in 1,000, 3 in 1,000, right? We still need 1,000 people. But then once you have 10,000 people, 20,000 people, it's that much easier to find people that are compatible. And then the joy isn't just making relationships. We can then make friend groups, clusters, just creating groups of people that are compatible, not just romantically, but socially. You know, you want to create things together, you want to work together, you can create businesses together. That sort of social networking becomes a very real part of what this site can do at this point, because you're not just defining people on how they're interested in sex or substances or whatever. It's more about how they think and feel, and then their ambitions. That'll probably be another aspect that I add later on for long-term compatibility. But right now we're still building. So as the system builds up and out, I plan on creating a whole slew of events, projects. Once COVID lets down, definitely having parties, meetups, get-togethers, that sort of thing. Currently just focused in on New York City just because I'm in New York, but we'll definitely be focused on expanding to cities all around the country and all around the world, in fact. But these things take time, so not that I'm gonna take it slow or anything, but I understand the limitations of the modern day just because of the way the world is right now. And furthermore, it's just more fun this way, right? Just seeing how things build and then being able to pull people together and having massive blowout events, like that'll be a real joy, especially once you can find people, like a whole party of compatible people. Like, how fun would that be? Like a few assholes, but you all like the same, like, let's say a no drinking party, right? But everybody's into psychedelics. That'd be very interesting. Or a no psychedelic party and no drinking party, like a full-on sober event, but you still have your comfort with some people there. Nicotine is still fine for you, that sort of thing. Oh, that reminds me, I need to add nicotine to substances that people use. That's things like that. Like, there are a lot of details in putting this sort of system together. Recently, another one was adding dietary matching. So, are you a carnivore, are you a vegetarian, are you an omnivore, that sort of thing. So, and just like the different ways of dealing with those characteristics too, because I know people fluctuate easily between them, and like some of my best relationships have been with people that lived very different lives from me in terms of diet, religion, that sort of practice. And there's a lot to learn from people that are different from you, and just limiting us to only meeting people that are like us through online dating just creates a sort of it reinforces the echo chambers of Facebook and whatnot. Though we do find people further from our social circle, but they're not really far from us in terms of socializing, because they're like us. That's why they got matched with us on the site. So that's another thing I liked about this site, right? Because I could then separate, flirtiness from horniness, neediness, and morality, and all these things. One could decide what characteristics they wanted in place for their next matches, and that becomes a lot of fun, right? Sure, the first thing I'm sure a lot of guys will think about is just matching on horniness alone. And you can try it. I don't think it'll be very rewarding, because just because somebody is horny, it doesn't mean that you want to be around them. So, and like from then on, it just becomes this whole system of avoiding and creating better matches and learning about yourself through the journey with the site, right? Because, yeah, me personally, like, one of the reasons I liked Doki Cupid was because I could go in, re-answer quizzes, and see how I changed as a person from year to year, and see how I changed as a person in relation to people in my age group from year to year. And like, that'll be a feature that comes in a bit later, just because it's data inclusive, data intensive, and the data needs to be there. It's pretty much a series of empty databases right now, but it's ready to be filled, and it's just a fun way to explore. And just answering the quizzes is very fun. And I do ask some weird questions, I will admit, but it's just to keep it alive, keep the questions you ask yourself about why you answer a certain way in the forefront of your mind, right? And I've also found that there's a lot of lack of knowledge in terms of sexual health and mental health, and these sorts of questions aren't really addressed by these sites. Like, they may touch on drugs, they may touch on addiction very slightly, but they don't really get into the meat of it. They may touch on sexual health a little bit, but they don't get into the meat of it. Like, have you had HIV, for instance? These things are relevant, highly relevant to people, and they're uncomfortable conversations that you don't really want to have, that this is designed to keep you from having to have, because you'd have matched already on dimensions like that. So, like, we'll be setting up the priority function, I guess is what you call it, for each individual variable, just to, keep things sane and safe. Though it will be like other dating sites in terms of like matching with people that fit you in a lot of ways. Like, we'll be studying writing styles, we'll be studying priorities, we'll be studying interests. One of the big things I'll probably be getting into is adding more quizzes about things that you find entertaining, because another thing that I found, especially with other dating sites, is that it was never about the matches being good or bad. For instance, like, the best matches I found were always people that put in the work to, put themselves out there, so that when we got to know each other, I knew to a level who I was meeting before I'd met them. Right? I knew we'd get along. I knew we had shared interests. I knew we had a shared sense of humor. But a lot of people, going through one question at a time, get tired and leave. So that's part of why I chose to make them these clustered forums, right? Where if you don't get through a section, you just don't you don't do anything. Like, the data doesn't come to the system. You have to put in the effort to finish a section before it gets added on. But it becomes a lot of fun, right, as I add more and more sections. Like, my next big thing will probably be an entertainment section. Like, what sort of common media do you like? What sort of cultural mediums do you enjoy? That sort of thing. And then you start to make friends on the site based purely on cultural interest and morality, right? Like, leaving the flirtiness out of it, leaving the horniness out of it. And those sorts of dynamics become part of what we use to create the events, to create the large public or virtual events, right? So we know people get along in one way, and we know that there's a subset of enough, relatively flirty people, and we know that there's a subset of relatively horny people, and they meld with the greater group at large. Because this also goes back to something that I've been working on since like the earliest days of my undergrad. I called it party math. It was, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a way of applying mathematical principles to organizing events, and just, creating graphs of people, how they would likely link, together, how they would form edges and nodes, and whether you'd have super nodes of groups within the party that talk to one another, and sub nodes, which are usually the individuals, and how they interact within that super node, and then the way individuals within the node link to other super nodes that are then individual sub nodes, and how like social networks meld and interact in a real world environment in a tangible way, and then ways of encouraging that sort of dynamic intermix of people and ideas and just enjoyment. So that's a large part of why I designed the system the way it is, just to sort of, I guess the best way to say it is just to force people to put in the effort, because there's no point in like answering 10-15 questions on a dating site and expecting to find a good match. It's just a shot in the dark. You get a lot of like wasted time. There's not a lot of interest. There's not a lot to even like dive into a conversation about, because you barely know what's happening on the other end. But that's about 95 to 99% of the people on a website like that. So it's a self-defeating goal, unless the goal is to keep people coming to swipe right and to see advertising, which they fit that purpose. But that's also why I built this site without ads, just to force a deeper understanding, a deeper focus. I mean, it costs, but like I think the benefit of it is that it costs me financially, but it pays dividends socially, it pays dividends psychologically, spiritually, and like I enjoy going on it. So another thing that I like about the site is that even if you were to start and find a relationship on the site, there's still more on the site to explore, ideas to be gained, to be played with, and then you have little things like the perfume shop. I'm gonna be updating that a bit more, setting up a sale there. Also, like I plan on adding more products to the site. I'm working on partnerships with new brands for skincare lines and things like that. So just helping bring up small businesses and just expanding them and giving them access to larger markets. So a dating site that sells perfumes, like maybe we may have some insight into what your date may like for a perfume. I don't know, they may say it. That sort of use of our data in that sense. So we're not selling our data to other members, to other companies. We're using it internally to optimize ourselves for you. And we have music on the site, just music videos. So with these lists of videos, and then when we find out what your interests are in terms of music, we can then recommend lists to you. We can compile lists for you, that sort of thing. And it just becomes a place where let's say you're with your boo, you don't really want to think too much, you want to but we already have your profile on hand. So this will be maybe a year or two down the line for us, where you just come on, we know it's YouTube, we then set up a playlist for you, give you some movie, some video recommendations, that sort of thing, just based on what you've said, gift ideas, and then just a place to make the relationship easier, a place to make it better, a place to make it more human, and just a place to learn a bit more about each other and build without having to worry about competing with other people, right? Because that was one of the real annoyances for me with these dating sites, because like I'd meet somebody great, like fantastic, and then the site will start pushing other people, and I'm like, I've already found somebody, like I'm good, like seriously I'm good. But then the question is, why don't you just stop going on the site? Well, yes, but it's you'd been searching for months, you'd been meeting people for months, you have friends on the site already that you want to talk to that aren't romantic, you're too far, that sort of thing. So you work to move everybody off the site, but then in the interim you still get pushed, like, oh, this person matched you, like, okay, thank you, you're halfway across the world. Like, I mean, those sorts of relationship matches And then there's rarely an option to just turn off the matching portion and just be like, let me chill with the people I have. So there's a feeding into the addictiveness, the addictive cycle of clicking and clicking and clicking, especially with pictures of people, because it's pleasurable to see beautiful people. So why wouldn't we want to keep clicking and seeing more? And it's not even if you're like pursuing anything, it's just the dopamine rush of, oh, that's new. But I feel like that's one of the corruptive aspects of modern dating, particularly, because like we want it to be easy, right? But in reality, when we find people that we like, it's like, I'm thinking about like things like back in school, or when you're meeting somebody at a bar for the first time, or meeting somebody at a party, things like that. Like, you have an idea of who they are already. You've heard about them. Sure, they look good, but it's more often the person that they are that interests you more than how they look, or at least it should be, or at least I hope it would be. And in that respect, I feel like this site is more geared towards like the nerdiness, the nerds amongst us, the people that may not, naturally wear makeup, or wear the nicest clothing, or just try to fit the modern definition of what it means to look like or be a man or woman. We just live our lives and enjoy what we enjoy, and want to find people that live their lives and enjoy what they enjoy too. So this way you're not falling into the pressure of putting up a false persona. Like, I wanted this to be a site where people can feel comfortable to be honest, because their faces aren't attached to what they're saying. The only thing that's attached to you really is an email address, and from there it's just a choice of, like, if you want to find somebody that's compatible with you, like in your deepest levels, do you tell the truth about yourself or not? And the power of that truth is, when you are honest with yourself, when you're honest about what you want, what you're doing, like, you find people that are compatible, and like there's power in that, there's joy and beauty in that. So I guess time's up. It's 8 o'clock for me. I'm gonna be submitting this soon. I hope the music wasn't too loud.